This is episode 61 of the Life in Norway show. Today I'm joined by Jason Terflinger, the Managing Director of the American Chamber of Commerce in Norway. We talk about the purpose and work of the organisation, and whether the stereotypes are true about the difference in working culture between Norway and the United States. Jason also offers up some tips for Americans looking to find work and move to Norway. You can find out more information about what we talk about on the show on the show notes page. Head on over to lifeinnorway.net/podcast and look for episode 61. Happy listening. I'm joined today by Jason Terflinger. He's the Managing Director of the American Chamber of Commerce in Norway. Jason, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, David.
American Chamber of Commerce in Norway. It's going to be an interesting topic, I think, for anyone interested in business or just generally interested in Norwegian-American relations. Before we dive into that topic, though, let's hear about what brought you to Norway in the first place.
Thanks for that question, David. It wasn't the original plan. I can say it that way. I was studying political science and Russian at university in Florida. I happened to have a Norwegian roommate at the time of graduating. The original plan was to live and work in Moscow for some time. And just as I was graduating, the Russian economy and the ruble kind of had a serious setback. So that also meant a serious setback for my future planning. So I did end up going to Moscow, visiting for a while, but then I came to Oslo to visit my then former roommate as well, and thought, well, okay, if I'm not able to live the original plan, maybe I could live abroad in Norway for a time. That time, the thought was a year or two. I met my now Norwegian wife, and the plan extended by several years.
Well, several years. We're talking 20 years now, I think, that you've been living in Oslo. So it's funny how life lands us these paths, these unexpected directions, and a very similar story for me as well. So
yeah, I always feel half guilty because I know a lot of people have been, studied Norwegian in the States, studied Norwegian, have Norwegian kind of background, family connections, and I more or less kind of stumbled into Norway on the way somewhere else. So I couldn't even have told you, before 1998. I couldn't have drawn the shape of Norway or told you the language, frankly. So it's a bit embarrassing to think back, but things worked out very well, and I love it here.
Yeah, it's a very similar story for me, actually. Norway was an accident, turned out to be a very happy accident.
Yeah.
Now, you're now the Managing Director of the American Chamber of Commerce. Now, I think most people understand the concept of a Chamber of Commerce, especially in a single city. So if you go to, I don't know, Lubbock in Texas, there's probably a Chamber of Commerce there for companies in Lubbock to network with each other, to give each other business and so on. How does it work within an American Chamber of Commerce in Norway? What's its purpose?
Also, I guess the big differentiation between the Lubbock, Texas Chamber of Commerce and us would be that Lubbock is trying to attract companies and profile the city as a place to do business. Most of our members, if not all, have already decided to do business in Norway. So they're up and running here, basically, and we're trying to facilitate business for them and make their life easier, and make, at the end of the day, hopefully make it easier for them to attract additional investment by their parent companies to the Norway operations.
And are we talking major corporations here, or small businesses started by an American entrepreneur, or somewhere in the middle?
So we have about 230 member companies. Half of those companies are American, and those companies are all large or medium to large size U.S. parented companies. We do not have a lot of small startups started by Americans as member companies.
So you say around half of the members are Americans. So those that are not, I assume, are Norwegian companies. Are they Norwegian companies looking to break into the US market?
Yeah, so the other half is a combination of Norwegian companies and then third country kind of parented companies. Iceland Air is a member of us, for example, or Roche. The red thread is that they all have a footprint in both the U.S. and Norway. We have on the Norwegian company side, Yara, Hydro, Equinor. Telenor, DNB. So we have the large Norwegian companies, most of whom have operations in the United States. And then we also have a bunch of SMEs on the Norwegian side. And, they could be anywhere from just kind of starting their U.S. operations or getting things set up to well-established and looking to expand further.
I see. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, I've been a member of Chamber of Commerce in the past, in my former life in the UK, and I'm sure they did more, but my memory really is of networking events,
Yes.
not a lot else. When I had a good look around your website, there was networking events, sure, but there were a lot of other things too. And something that caught my eye was advocacy.
Yeah.
And far more than I would have expected to see. So could you tell us a little bit about the activities within the Chamber of Commerce, but then also focus in on the advocacy work that you do and on what the purpose for that is?
Sure. So, right. People think first and foremost of a chamber in terms of events, and we certainly do those, all shapes and sizes, small, large. We just did a large Thanksgiving charity dinner for a couple hundred people earlier this week. To roundtables discussing very specific themes and topics. The second kind of tranche of what we do is member services, basically facilitating business between member companies, connecting the dots, relationship management, information sharing to the extent that we're able to between member companies, and profiling of the member leaders is an important thing too. And then the third tranche is basically advocacy or lobbying on behalf of groups, usually 5 or more member companies have to have an issue, and we have to be able to kind of move the needle on that. So there are all kinds of challenges between U.S. and Norway and Europe and the U.S. To be more specific. And we kind of jump in where we think we can have an impact and make life easier for our members. Technology, food and bev, healthcare are 3 areas where we really focus on these things. We can also do our job quite nicely if we can get one of the larger industry associations in Norway to pay attention to an issue that's impacting international businesses. I should also say, David, the AmCham is one of 117 AmChams around the world, and we cooperate closely with our Nordic counterparts as well as Europe. And our parent organization is the U.S. Chamber in Washington, D.C., which is the world's largest business association, and they are basically only doing advocacy. So we have a good mix here, and different chambers do it different ways, but we have quite a bit to do on that front.
Is there any involvement with, for instance, the Nordic Union? Because from what I've read on the Nordic Union, they have some very interesting working groups and focus groups. I'm sure there are several around the themes of business. Do the various AmChams in the Nordic countries get involved in that kind of work at that level, or is it more about the national laws and regulations that you're trying to work with?
Both. So there'll be there'll be Nordic level issues that we can address together. For example, we hosted a big summit on sustainability, and kind of within our respective operating environments, where can we kind of move the needle, and what can we do with our local governments? And then Sweden will have a different set of issues, of course, than we in Norway. One thing that we got involved in recently was the fact that Norway was not allowing Americans to visit Norway for COVID regulations, but the rest of the Nordics were allowing Americans. As of today, in fact, Americans are able to visit. They still have to quarantine. So it's a little bit different than the Nordics, but there's a fundamental kind of CDC card issue there that we're still working on.
That's interesting that you've been involved in those kind of issues as well. Yeah, very high profile and very highly relevant issues. We're not talking about sort of fairly obscure laws and regulations here. This is big stuff that makes a real difference to people.
We're trying, and I mean, these issues, we don't often get very public in our kind of conversations on issues, but this one was a little bit different, and we're going to keep pushing on it with a relevant kind of ministries.
Yeah. I mentioned specific regulations there, and something that caught my eye, as I already said, was some of the advocacy work you've done. And I noticed there was a white paper or some kind of document about the VAT compensation scheme for international schools in Norway. Now, that's a highly specific issue, but it's also an issue that must impact American professionals who move to Norway temporarily or permanently and want their children or need their children to attend an international school. So could you tell us a little bit about that specific example and what AmCham did to move the needle?
I mean, any expat director, one of the first things they're going to look at is where, if they have a family, where can my kids go to school and what is the level of the education? What's the standard? And there are a lot of fantastic international schools around the major cities here and even then some. And they operate oftentimes on a very tight budget because they varying degrees of kind of local or government funding for them. So when there's a question mark on 25% of their budget, whether or not they can get compensated for the value-added tax that they pay out, that's a big problem and could potentially lead to a lot of those schools having to kind of shut down or close some of their programming. So, the long story short, the finance ministry was kind of interpreting legislation one way. We and a number of other organizations, including the U.S. Embassy, for example, thought otherwise. And at the end of the day, we were able to kind of keep the status quo and have these international schools be able to kind of operate as they had been. But it was a big threat and a very specific issue that we needed to kind of jump on very quickly.
Great. Let's move things up a level now and talk more generally about the business culture in Norway. Now, speaking in stereotypes, I think Norway and the US, we're probably talking polar opposites in terms of working culture. Whether that's true or not, that's another question. But the US often has a reputation as, you have to work 60-hour work weeks and to progress in your career, and it's all about taking that next step up the ladder and so on. Whereas in Norway, the focus is very much on lifestyle and raising children and the huge amount of holiday and time off flexibility you get in the workplace. I'm not saying those things are true, but I think most stereotypes are at least grounded in some truth. What do you think are the differences between working life in Norway and the US, having spent many years in both countries now?
Well, first off, you have to remember that most of my professional career has been in Norway. So, take this with a grain of salt. I did, of course, work in the States. I think my last job was Bank of America. I appreciate the kind of the work-life balance and kind of 60-hour week stereotypes. I assure you, there are plenty of people amongst our member companies that work those kind of hours. Look, when an expat director arrives, I can tell you early on if they're going to kind of have a hard time here or have a good run during their leadership of their organization. And a lot of that comes down to if they're vocal in their opposition to what they perceive their employees' work ethics to be. So a lot of empty offices around 4 or 5 o'clock. Maybe that's not not the same wherever they're coming from, be it the States or other parts of Europe or around the world. What I will say is a lot of those same employees will go home, take care of the kids, pick up the kids at Barnehage, and then put in a few more hours or a couple more hours in the evening. I've also, in a way, Sunday evening is almost the new Monday morning. I'm always amazed when I get in on Monday morning how many emails are in my inbox from people working on Sunday night. So it's just traditionally there's been more flexibility, I would say. I think COVID has maybe changed that even more in the States than here. As people kind of are available to work from wherever, I think it's important that we have some type of guardrails for people and when they're expected to be available. But good work-life balance here. That's absolutely right. But there are a lot of places in the States where, people are very happy with their setups as well. So we have to be careful with the generalization sometimes, I think.
Absolutely. When I first moved to Norway more than 10 years ago now, I worked in an office that was mostly staffed by British people because of the specific industry it was.
Yeah.
And yet we were working for a Norwegian company who had an American client. And these are two very big, well-known companies. I won't say the names because it's not fair on them. But there was an almighty culture clash, and it was very clear, very visible for everyone to see.
Yeah.
What do you think American companies or American professionals coming over here to Norway, what do they need to adjust or what do they need to adapt in their approach to work in order to succeed here?
Well, I'm curious, and I know you're the one that's supposed to be asking the questions, David, but were those two companies, were they East Coast headquartered or West Coast US headquartered, or do you remember?
Good question. I'm not actually sure where the HQ would be. We're talking a very large company here, though.
Sure. But this is a generalization on my part. We see differences kind of on culture clashes between East Coast Norway and West Coast Norway.
Okay.
Generalizing, but and Midwest as a whole other kind of set. The West Coast kind of companies tend to have fewer kind of instances of culture clashes than the East Coast. And it also comes down to industries too. Financial industry would be different than healthcare, would be different than insurance or finance. So, all kinds of different things at play. The realization that you are the visitor or that your company is operating in this environment and you're not trying to kind of recreate headquarters here, I think is a good start, frankly. And very efficient kind of when work is done here, it's very efficient. There's a lot of kind of collaboration in the decision-making process that might not be there at some of the motherships or the headquarter cities. Just a general kind of flexibility and willingness to work with the staff on their terms, I think is very important instead of trying to kind of recreate maybe exactly how it is other places.
Right. Now, you mentioned earlier, Jason, the number of Americans who have this dream or desire to move to Norway and live the Scandinavian lifestyle. Now, I know I get emails every day of the week from Americans in particular who are looking for advice in moving to Norway. And there are a really decent number of American companies over here that may be interested in employing American professionals. Do you have any advice for Americans seeking a job in Norway? Should they look to American companies, or do you have any other general advice for them?
No, they should not first and foremost look to American companies.
Okay.
That's would be my first bit of advice. Look, there are Americans that work for American companies here, but American companies are here to act locally for the most part. Some of the American companies here have more internationally, so they have production here for international markets. GE Healthcare, for example, or Thermo Fisher. But American companies, by and large, are here to act locally. Americans, the most Americans that we work with work for kind of medium to larger size Norwegian companies, in fact. So, Equinor, Telenor, these companies, and on down the line, medium and increasingly a number of small companies. One of our American technology company members, for example, I think they have maybe 5% of their staff is Norwegian. So, there are exceptions to the rule, and it kind of comes down to the industry and company by company specifics. But don't necessarily assume that American companies are more likely to hire you because you're American. Most of our American member companies are led by local managers.
So if someone is applying for a job from the US, is there any advice you can give them in terms of what a Norwegian company is looking for if they're hiring an international employee?
Well, I mean, 2/3 to half of kind of job openings are published. The other half of people that end up working at these companies basically are the companies are on constant kind of watch for sharp people. So if you have skill sets that are needed here, which you can imagine, it's a relatively small country. Technology background is especially sought after here, as it is in the United States and everywhere else these days. So open applications to these companies and actually taking the time and making the effort now that it's technically allowed to actually come over here and spend some time and meet people and show that you're serious. It's much easier to take an applicant seriously if you can meet in person. And have that applicant explain that this is not going to be a work vacation or tour for them, that they are considering being here long term. When you hire people in Norway, it's a long term kind of idea behind that. Employers are happy to engage people that are going to be here for a while, but it's very hard for employers here to let people go. So once they make that decision to invest in an employee, it's a pretty serious decision.
That's some great advice, Jason. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I assume AmCham is based in Oslo, but I imagine you must have some events or other presence in cities like Stavanger or Bergen.
Yeah, I mean, we are the American Chamber of Commerce in Norway, but I would say maybe 75% of our member companies are within the Oslo region. We have a good number of companies in the Stavanger region and then scattered throughout the country. On the event side, obviously, it's primarily focused on Oslo, but with more and more virtual events taking place, we're looping in people from all over Norway and all over the United States on some of these things. Go ahead.
So it sounds as if you must live in Oslo or there or thereabouts.
Just near Bekkestua, so just 10 kilometers west, basically, of downtown.
And how is life in Oslo for you?
It's great. It's great. I love Oslo. It feels like a decent sized city. All kinds of restaurants and cultural life. During COVID, I worked the entire time from the office, so I would bike or jog to and from, which was nice. Tried to avoid public transportation, but very easy to get around. And the scale of the city is quite nice.
Jason, this has been a really interesting introduction to AmCham and the activities and events that you run. Thank you very much. Before I let you go, I'll need to ask you the final 3 questions that I ask every guest on the Life in Norway show.
Sure.
So some quick answers from you, please. What's the best thing about living in Norway?
The best thing about living in Norway? That's a great question. Every day I still, after all these years, wake up kind of remembering, or one of the first thoughts I have is that, I'm in Norway. So it's exotic, it's interesting, it's a constant challenge as an expat, but it's refreshing. And I think if I had to pick one thing, just a high level of trust in society, which is for someone working with what I do on a daily basis, being able to kind of trust your business partners and who you're dealing with is key and really appreciated.
So still exotic and interesting after 20 years.
It is. It's funny. I every day I think about it, and for different reasons, depending on the time of year. Yeah.
Well, there's been an obvious challenge in recent years with living in Norway. But aside from that, what's the most challenging thing for you about living in Norway?
Yeah, and exactly along those time of year lines, I would say the most challenging thing about living in Norway is the month of November. It's I'm from Indiana. I'm used to the cold weather. That's fine, but the lack of sunlight at this time and the lack of snow. As we move into December, January, we start to get the snow and skiing becomes possible. But right now, it's a dark, cold time of year.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And finally, your favorite place in Norway?
I would say cross-country skiing anywhere above the tree line would be my favorite place in Norway. And that's a lot of places, but that's just it's breathtaking, and it's something I always kind of look forward to. And you get a clean white slate, on a sunny day, and it's just breathtaking.
Fantastic. Where can people find out more about the American Chamber of Commerce in Norway, Jason?
They can check out AmCham.no, www.amcham.no. All kinds of information out and available on us. Would love to hear from folks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, David.